Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Star Wars Lads. It is a Monday, so this is a special topic for this week, and we hope you guys have all had a great holiday weekend, a great Christmas weekend. You enjoyed it all with friends and family, and got to maybe do some Star Warsy things that you haven't got to catch up with this for this year, because this video is going to be our top five favorite things from 2021 in Star Wars. So this is pretty much only focusing on things that have wrapped up or been a big part of 2021. We're going to be talking about mostly books here because that was the biggest thing, books and comics. We did have two television shows. We had Star Wars Visions, we had Bad Batch. So we might be talking about those in this list. We also had quite a few books and the beginning of the High Republic Initiative. So this was a really big year for Star Wars publishing, arguably the best year we've ever had for Star Wars publishing, at least under canon, and with a wide ranging group of stories from before episode one, during the during the original trilogy. We got the Thrawn ascendancy stuff. We got so many different things this year, and if you're a fan of all of that, there's a lot of good stuff to talk about. So we're going to dive into all of that and give you both of our top fives. But before we do that, hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what you thought of this year in Star Wars, what your top five favorite Star Wars things from this year are. We're also only going to be focusing on, we're not going to talk about Trail of Shadows as one of our five because it's not done yet, even though we both really love that comic series. So that will probably be eligible for a 2022 list, but it's not going to be eligible here. And then also, this is on Monday, so Boba Fett has not come out yet, but since only one episode is going to be out in 2021, that's going to be counting on the 2022 show list for that year. So we won't be talking about those things, but give us your thoughts on what your favorite 2021 Star Wars things are, or maybe you're just getting into Star Wars this year and you found some new things that came out in previous years and it's your favorite things you read this year or you watched this year and you're starting to follow Star Wars for the first time along with our channel. We want to hear your thoughts down below. So yeah, let's get into our list. I'm going to pass it over to Sanak here for his honorable mentions and number five.
All right. Well, thanks, Liam. I guess my honorable mentions, I will go with starting off with Trail of Shadows. I know we're not done. I know you can't really count it as a top five series or top five item to come out of the Star Wars universe this year. But in the three released issues that it's had so far, it's been outstanding. Surprisingly, I think another honorable mention that shot out of nowhere was Tempest Runner. Tempest Runner is technically maybe okay. It is. I didn't end up reading Dooku Jedi Lost through the audio format. I read it when the script came out, and that was pretty good. But when it came to Tempest Runner, it's not exactly an audiobook. It's an audio drama. And I was like, okay, well, I can't really find this online, in like a text form. I have to really listen to it. And it's like one of those old like radio dramas that like Star Wars has a strong history with, the original 70s radio dramas of A New Hope and stuff, where it followed a little bit more about C3PO and R2D2 and some of the stuff that was happening on the Tantive V4, right? And this was fun in that same way because you could really hear the noises of the space battles, of the stuff happening with the characters. You could hear them like choking, you could hear them attacking and hitting each other. And Lorna D, I enjoyed her as a character, but what a wild trip that this whole story was for her. Like you could see the highest of highs for her, the lowest of lows. And at the end of the day, she's like even more Lorna D than she ever was, which was a fascinating thing to like listen to. So well, props to Star Wars publishing doing that. I want to see more of that. And then finally, I will just shout out the High Republic Adventures line and the High Republic lines from IDW and Marvel, respectively. A lot of great synergy, a lot of good stories. Sometimes there are weeks where I think the High Republic Adventures is better than just the High Republic line, and the High Republic line has been no slouch. So that should just tell you how great it's been. And I really hope that we get to continue with these Padawans, even if it's not necessarily under IDW. Um, I will make a final mention to the War of the Bounty Hunters miniseries itself, including the Alpha series issue. I thought the overall War of the Bounty Hunters era of comics has been good. We're now kind of in the Crimson Reign, second part of the Charles Soule trilogy of comics, and it's great that it's all interconnected. But this is one of those things that feels like because it's so interconnected, it starts to strain the main lines and the perspectives of that. Like we mentioned in our comics videos, Vader has still been dragged around for like months and months now, but the main War of the Bounty Hunter issues were very interesting and some cool, awesome action and setup for what I hope is a lot more underworld stuff moving forward in both the late Empire era and the early New Republic era. So if you just want to see Boba kick ass and see everyone just vie for Han Solo, that 5 issues plus the alpha is it's really good. So I would recommend it. But yeah, those are my honorable mentions. How about you, Liam? What were yours?
Similar to yours, I wanted to also mention the High Republic from Marvel. It was steadily very good throughout. Rarely like the best book in a week, but like never bad. It was always pretty good, and it's kind of been the story of the High Republic all year. There's nothing that's been bad. Some things better than others, some things excellent. Also, the High Republic Adventures, again, first 5 issues, kind of redundant and boring. The last, what are we on now? I think 11 or 12. The last 7, great, like genuinely great, better than the High Republic. Definitely pick those up. And then I also want to echo War of the Bounty Hunters. The event itself was pretty good. The 6 issues, the 5 issues, and the alpha, all good issues, all strong storytelling. Even if it detracted from some of the tie-ins, tie-ins weren't great, but I did consistently enjoy the miniseries throughout. And I also want to give out a shout out to Star Wars from Charles Soule because that was also quite good this year. Pretty much, Star Wars was always consistent. It was the best tie-in. It was the one, probably because it was written by the same guy who wrote War of the Bounty Hunters, the one that felt most connected to that story. It felt like it gave us different layers of that story that we didn't get in the main series. It's the only tie-in I would recommend reading with the War of the Bounty Hunters if you're going to get into it. So I want to give that a shout out. And then from the High Republic, 2 novels that didn't make my list that I also want to talk about. A Test of Courage, which came out at the beginning of the year, and it's probably my favorite middle grade book in all of Star Wars canon. It's really solid, introduces Vernestra and Emery and those characters that end up becoming a big part of this universe, so I'd recommend it. And then Into the Dark didn't make my list, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's a good book. Claudia Gray, really good. always really good. So I want to recommend that as well if you haven't read it. And then Alphabet Squadron Victory's Price. I didn't get to read, but I heard it's great, and I heard that each book in the Alphabet Squadron gets better and better, but this one is by far the best. Let me know down below. I do plan on getting into those this year. I haven't read the Alphabet Squadron novels. Um, when they came out, there was kind of mixed reviews for them, and I was like, okay, I don't know. Uh, but yeah, I've heard this one's actually really, really great. So I would like to get into that at some point. Let us know down below if you've read that and what you thought of it, and if you think the Alphabet Squadron book should be the next thing I dive into. Yeah, those are my honorable mentions. So, what's your number 5 on your list?
So my number 5 is Star Wars Visions, but more specifically The Night Jedi. I liked Akakiri. I think that was like a very strange and it is very vision focused. And it was a very unique way to end these anthology short films from these anime studios. So that shout out there. I obviously love The Elder. I think that's probably like the first like visual content of the High Republic without explicitly being High Republic, or maybe it's before, or maybe it's after. Either way, it's still in a better time period than the prequels. I really love that too. I wasn't a big fan of things like Tatooine Rhapsody. That one was one I was very hyped for, and then the chibi art style mixed in with Rada the Hutt somehow becoming like a rock star, at least in my head canon. At least in my head canon, that's who he is. And then I didn't love to a degree, La Pinocho. I like where people you know have their heart and their intentions and saying it was one of the best. The both of us, it really wasn't. Just didn't really feel like it made much sense for like why Lop is a bunny without showing anything unique about her species, and there wasn't anything unique about the fighting in it, and it feels like there's just two different stories jammed together that needed like an essential middle part or at least a montage. And then there's something like The Village Bride, which I thought was fascinating, but it kind of comes and goes for me because I really enjoyed a lot of the mythology and the spirituality and like the loss of trauma and everything connected to that. But it's not necessarily one that like imprints on my mind as much as like The Elder did, or especially not like The Ninth Jedi. And The Ninth Jedi for me, I mean, it's my favorite. I know it's not Liam's necessarily, but it's for me, it's very good because it is kind of like a proof of concept. It really is just to like show off like, hey, this could be like a cool Star Wars anime years after the sequels, and it could work. But I think more than anything, I just love the fighting. I love the creativity of like the cuts. Like you could literally see the body slice and fall off. Very anime-esque, from some of the best ever anime shots. Very dynamic fighting. Very interesting how like using a lightsaber will change the color, which it kind of is canon, but not to the same way. And seeing that kind of like that translucent color before, the girl becomes fully realized in her force power was really cool. I love the character who just is there, like genuinely, like, yeah, I'm here with like the other seven of us because we're here for, this leader guy who will show us the way. And he's just like, he's got, I forget his name, but he's just got some like the most like plain American name ever, like Ed or something. I don't know, like,
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
forgetting what it was too, but it was
uh,
something like that. It was really,
yeah, yeah. It was just like very non Star Warsy, and he just felt so like awkward too until he's like, "I'll spring to action, I promise." And yeah, I mean, it made me want more, but it was also a short that was just immensely satisfying. Such a cool location too. It's like a floating castle in the sky, but in space, but upside down because of gravity. Just the whole like trebuchet launching of stuff was so interesting and unique. Um, a mix of everything that I felt I love about Star Wars with things that I loved about anime, and then just combining that to create something unique and new. And yeah, I think that's why I loved The Night Jedi specifically. What was your number 5, Liam?
yeah. Well, I looked up the name. It was Ethan. I knew it was something like really basic like that. Yeah, Ethan. That was kind of strange, but my number five was also Visions. Visions surprised me in a lot of ways. I think it was the good episodes were really really good. They nailed a lot of stuff. I was intrigued by Visions. I was never really hyped for Visions. I think I enjoyed the show more than I thought I would. As singular episodes, I mean, there were some really great ideas. There were some great uses of the Star Wars mythology. There were some great looks at expanding the Star Wars mythology, not just being complacent with taking the ideas and being like, okay, let's give this person a lightsaber. There are those episodes, but the best ones are like, no, let's tell a real story in this world. Let's expand how the Force works. Let's create new cultures and new identities for people and how they use the Force and how they look at the Force. I thought all of that was really really great. Yeah, for me, my favorite episode was The Elder, and just because it felt the most like canon, it felt like this story could actually be told. It's great lightsaber duels, some really cool stuff there. I love that episode. I did love the Ninth Jedi. I think I can't remember if I put it as my number two or three in my video that I did of the top 9 Visions episodes. I think I put it at three with the Village Bride at two because I really love the Village Bride. I think that's one of the more underrated episodes of the show. People aren't talking about that one as much. I really love the way that looks at the Force. The animation there, I guess, is a little like less impressive as some of the other stuff, but I really like the way it looks at the Force. And then the duel is great kickoff episode, some really great action, great art style, really good stuff there. So yeah, great show overall. Again, yes, the bottom, I'd say the bottom two were not great, and that is Tatooine Rhapsody and Lopinocho for me. Lopinocho just had way too much to tell in like 20 minutes, and it doesn't flesh it out enough. Sorry for all of you who love it. I think I said in the original review, I'd love to see a sequel to it. I think they've got a lot of great ideas, and I think they set up a lot of stuff, but it doesn't even wrap up at the end. Anyway, it's not the Lopinocho rant video, but didn't love that. But for the most part, I thought Visions was really, really good. A really cool entry into the Star Wars universe, and kind of a cool idea for letting us see stories, even though we don't have legends anymore. we still get to see these interesting stories. And to me, that's the most interesting thing about going back to legend stories I haven't read, is you get an entirely new perspective on Star Wars that you like don't think about anymore, because a lot of times with canon books and stuff, it's so saturated with how this is how Star Wars feels and this is how Star Wars looks, and we're going to tell a story in the original trilogy timeline because that's Star Wars. And when you read Legends, a lot of it is very weird and very different, and the stuff that was made before even the prequels came out. There's a lot of different views of Star Wars. And so it's cool seeing that kind of mentality come back to where we can say, we can just have fun making stuff with Star Wars iconography, with Star Wars themes, and we can tell our own stories. And we don't really need to worry about, oh, how does it connect with Luke Skywalker here? And what is it, Palpatine's overall plot with this? We can just enjoy it. And I think Visions was one of the most enjoyable things we got in Star Wars this year, even if it's not necessarily the most relevant into the future. So that's my number 5. What's your number 4?
So for me, my number 4 was The Bad Batch, most specifically the two-part finale, Return to Camino Lost. Um, it in any other year, I think this would be in like my number 2 or number 3, even if it had like a phenomenal movie come out or something. I just think that the publishing this year just knocked it out of the park. Um, and I think there was some flaws with the first season of The Bad Batch. As fun and awesome as it was, it took a lot of episodes just to like bounty of the week or here's something random happening. And then sometimes when there was like a good eventful episode, we'd suddenly just go back to what's her name, Sid or whatever her name is. Yeah, we'd go back to Sid, and we're underneath her cantina, like fighting off like some Gundark like creature, because that's what we have to. And I do hear the criticism of like of these trained super soldiers who know everything about the galaxy, at least from a military standpoint, listening to this kid, this little girl who doesn't know anything. Yeah, I can see that criticism, and I think that criticism has extended to like how Disney Star Wars has really emphasized, like, okay, this is the formula. Here's an awesome character or group of characters. Now let's put this young child. But I mean, that was kind of this there in animation to start off with. That is kind of how the Clone Wars is. Ahsoka is our stand-in as a young kid for this galaxy of adventures that's happening during the Clone Wars, right? As much as you love Rex and Fives and all the clones, as much as you love Kenobi and Obi-Wan and Mace Windu and all that, you can't relate to them. They're just characters with their own stories. But Ahsoka is new and fresh and exciting. And I think maybe we lean into that a little too much, but yeah, and there's also the whole argument of like, is the Bad Batch even necessary? Is it really showing us like the immediate fallout of the Republic's collapse into the Empire, or is it just to say like we're gonna do a bunch of like episodes per week and then throw in some stuff with the Empire? I don't know if that verdict is correct. I think the jury's still out on exactly what the show is going to become, but started off great. It had a few middling episodes here and there, but it ended amazing as well. And I think a lot of that comes down to the Crosshair story. A lot of the stuff on Rylat, that two-parter was a really cool like sidestep from the main story, showcasing that like, hey, even if we aren't necessarily following the Bad Batch at every moment, they can be bit players and have an effect on the galaxy. And I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I mean, I think it really comes down for me that I enjoyed the Crosshair story, just seeing this man, and even if I don't love the changes to the canon story of Kanan, when he's Caleb Doom at the beginning, I love that comic. So it's a little disappointed to see that entrance change. It was very cool to me to see that progression of Crosshair from like immediately being susceptible to the chip, seeing how that affects the batch, seeing how like they take actions with Rex's guidance, and then seeing how Crosshair kind of like not only digs himself a deeper hole, but then eventually he just finds out with the final two-parter that the Empire doesn't need him. They will dispose of him. There are human recruits that once they're fully trained, or just because the sheer amount of them is there, it's better. And I think a lot of his journey of like accepting that he's made these mistakes, but not being unable to like make that change quite yet. His more tender moments with Echo, not Echo. Omega, yeah, I liked a lot of it, and plus it was heartbreaking to see Camino with all its mysteries, all its intrigue, all its cleanliness just be destroyed and sent to the bottom of the ocean. We've always thought that that could have been the ending. You know, maybe Boba Fett leads the what is it? The stormtroopers against the newly commissioned clone troopers, kind of like Battlefront 2 or something. But to see it happen this early, it was not only like sad, but like now there's like, oh, what comes next? So I think Bad Batch started off strong, here and there, and then finally it was like, yeah, it's we're setting up hopefully an amazing season 2 next year. So that's my number 4, and I it had overall though the strongest first season of any animated Star Wars show. That's for sure. So I am very excited, but again, publishing was just that much better for me this year because they knocked it out of the park. But yeah, what's your number 4?
We're still on the same page. My number 4 is the Bad Batch season 1 as well. When I was making my list, so the first things I thought of a lot of this year were the books, but then I was like, oh yeah, the Bad Batch. That's got to be number 1, right? Because it's like it's the show. But then I was thinking about it and I was like, did I really like it as much as some of these other things? I don't know. And I think it's great for what it is. And again, Bad Batch was like Visions, something I was definitely interested in. Not something I thought it was going to be great. Like I didn't know what angle they were coming at with this because we saw the Bad Batch for 4 episodes in season 7, and it was like they're cool, but they're like the X-Men mixed with the A-Team. It's like they have powers, they do cool things, but like how can we tell an actually important story with this? What is this going to be? And that first episode blew my mind. I was like, this is excellent. This was so good. But then, yeah, after that, once it starts to kind of have to put its pieces together with it being a 16 episode show, once you realize, okay, yeah, this is still an animated show and it's still the target audience is still children, even though mostly Star Wars fans like us are the ones watching it. They're still trying to get children to be the ones that are consuming this material. So you get those episodes where it's like the life lesson of the week. They got to fight this monster. They got to capture this bounty. Omega's got to learn something, and we expect those. And I don't want to condemn the show for doing that because we expect that, and especially in a 16 episode season, we're expecting those lulls. But I think it still doesn't mean we can't say that we didn't enjoy it as much as we enjoyed some other things this year. So I think the Bad Batch, when it hits, it's great. It's really great. It delivers on so much more of important Star Wars storytelling than I ever thought it would when it came out. I think after that first episode, it went from like 0 to 100, where I was like, I'm not really expecting anything too big in this. And then it was like after that first episode where they're crisscrossing with Revenge of the Sith, and I'm like, I'm expecting top notch stuff every week from the Bad Batch. And, it gave us it sometimes and it didn't give us it other times. The Cad Bane episodes were all great surprises there to see him. The end, I really enjoyed the end. I don't think the end landed for me as well as it landed for maybe even you or other people. I think it's a strong ending. It's a good character focused ending, which I think is cool because they could have really gone over the top and bombastic and huge with action, and they focus on the characters, which is always great, but it isn't like this huge game changing ending that I think we were all kind of building it up to be. I think this show is going to end up being in Rebels Clone Wars level for all of us once it's over. And as you said, the first season, it's definitely better than than both Clone Wars and Rebels first seasons. I think Rebels is comes more close to it. I think Clone Wars first season is a little bit messier. It doesn't really know what it wants to be. There's some great episodes in it, but it's still finding their footing. I think they had already nailed the Star Wars animated formula by the time they started Rebels, and then now with Bad Batch, it's their third time. Well, fourth time. We don't really talk about Resistance much on here. They did a great job, and I think having it at number 4 is like no slight on the Bad Batch. It was really really great this year, and I was shocked with how good it was when it was at its peak. But I'm only putting it at 4 because, like you said, the books this year, there were some really great books, and yeah, I don't have any other comics on my list. The top 3 are novels for me. So, what's your number 3?
Well, I think this is gonna break here, because my number 3 is Into the Dark. um, I, I, I don't know. For me, Claudia Gray is just she is what Timothy Zahn was to like revitalizing Star Wars after the original trilogy. Claudia Gray is what has kept Lucasfilm Publishing afloat, and not only afloat, but like consistently have a hit every year or so. She puts out so much and it's always, always spectacular. She's got such a I think when we talk about Timothy Zahn, a lot of us rightfully put him and Lucino, and sometimes Jackson Miller as like, oh, these are the best ever, like Star Wars writers. I'm not going to disagree that Zahn is important, but there are elements of his writing style, especially in the original Thrawn trilogy, that I find, a little lacking. And I think his immense focus on Thrawn is amazing for us as readers, but doesn't necessarily lend himself to writing like, some stuff like Outbound Flight and Mara Jade in the Legend stories. Like those are full of interesting concepts and ideas, but I don't know if they necessarily landed for me like the Thrawn trilogy does. And it's hard to. There's standalones, but even then, it didn't feel like when he did stretch his wings that, he really was soaring. He was like he was getting there, but it wasn't really Zahn being spectacular at every moment. Whereas when Claudia Gray can just jump from bloodlines to Princess Leia to Master and Apprentice to now, she started off with Lost Stars, which by all accounts should be like a cheesy young adult romance novel, but turned out to be the best of those things, plus like a great overview of like the original trilogy. And Into the Dark, I know a lot of people could argue that it's one of her weaker ones, but I thought it was like a fascinating side story. And she brought in some of my favorite characters of the High Republic era so far. Like we have obviously Reed Silas is huge. And because he's just like a nerdy Jedi who's just like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to fight, I just want to read books. And then if it is a spoiler, it is a spoiler. But his master dies because of the great disaster in Light of the Jedi. So he's now kind of just his life is fully changed, and he's never gonna be with someone who fully understands his desire to be somewhere and is also capable of pushing him in a like a very healthy way. So now he's like one of those Jedi in this era who's like, yeah, he's still got his support. He gets a new master in Comac Vitus, but Comac spends all of this book like dealing with his trauma, and Orla Jareni is part of that trauma, and like the flashbacks there were really interesting to me because it was like a mix of like a fantasy story for me, like of what like the huge like dragons and snakes or whatever those creatures were, but like the mix of the politics of the two like prince and princess of like opposite planets, and then like just seeing that their master died, his master himself is like a snake like being, which was very cool to see just described because Claudia is just so good at describing so many things. Yeah, like all the characters were standouts, and I'm not even mentioning like Affy Hollow or Leox Gyasi or the king himself, Geode. Like Geode has shown up in like High Republic Adventures here and there now, and people are like, I hate this man. He's a rock. He doesn't do anything. And that's exactly why I love this man. I'm like, he doesn't do anything. And then when you look away, he does everything. The old rogue, the good looking son of a gun nerf herder. I love this man, Geode. He does everything you need. And you could call it lazy writing, or you could just consider it as like Claudia Gray just having really fun with it. And Leo Yassi is just dazed and confused Matthew McConaughey. And I love that because I love dazed and confused. So yeah, characters are amazing. And then the story, like, yeah, it's maybe not anywhere near a top High Republic story, but I think for me, I just love character moments and details, and enough of Into the Dark is actually quite fascinating to me because it is about like it is probably the most severe the Dranger threat ever is. It is the most darkest part of it, and it ties in well with the story. Exploring the Amaxine station, which was first hinted in Charles, I believe it was Charles Soule's Rise of Kylo Ren run. Like you see it there, and it's back, and now you get to see a little bit more of like the damage that happened there was partly because of these guys, like partly because of the story, and yeah, and like characters like Nan, who's like actually Nile, like it took all the best elements of these different groups, different characters, and the settings, and put it all together in something not necessarily galaxy changing, but certainly something that will affect these characters for years to come in these High Republic stories. And it was fun. And there are some characters like Des Ryden, who's not really huge, but it's nice to see these characters bounce off of them. It was nice to see Jedi thoroughly mess up thinking that, oh, we have to remove these statues. That's the only way to get rid of the darkness, but not realizing that the only reason they sensed the darkness was because it was being contained by the statues. And working against the Jedi Order, doing the right thing, going back, fighting against the Nile, like all of it. It was an entertaining read to me, and young adult books often can feel like they're either too cheesy and then suddenly too dark. And I think there's always a strong balance. Like the Drenger came off as so comicky and everything else, but here I could genuinely have a fear for these characters. And not to say that Drenger wasn't a decent like threat, but this was like the peak of them for me. So I think that's why number three overall, just another amazing Claudia Gray book, Into the Dark. So I'm assuming High Republic book for you as your number three.
Ah, you would assume, but it is not. But yeah, I want to mention comment on Into the Dark too, real quick, because I agree with pretty much everything you said. I think it's just it's a casualty of the High Republic being so good this year that I left it out for some other stuff. It was probably my number six on here. But yeah, really good book overall. I love Leox and Geode and yeah, it's unique. I think it's unique for Claudia Gray because she's be able to write in so many different ways too. This one has a lot of humor in it, which is not really in most of her other books. So it's like she's really talented and versatile. My number three is it would be Thrawn Ascendancy Lesser Evil, but I put the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy because two of the books came out this year. I wasn't as big of a fan of Greater Good as I was of Lesser Evil and Chaos Rising, but I think the trilogy as a whole is arguably the best trilogy in the entire all of canon. I think it's better than Aftermath, and I think overall it's more consistent than the original Thrawn canon trilogy, if you want to call it that. Even though that's not really a trilogy. It doesn't really go together. At some parts it does, but anyway, yeah, Lesser Evil was so good. It was so good, and it made me fall in love with this whole trilogy really a lot more than I was prior. Zahn here creates an entirely new universe in Star Wars. It's so unique. It's like reading a completely new fantasy sci-fi book. Like has very few Star Wars elements besides the ships and some of but even the terminology he uses is different than the main canon Star Wars universe in our main part of the galaxy. Like this, he goes full on into creating his own science fiction fantasy world here. And the stuff he pulls from legends, but also the stuff he creates new with the new characters. And he does a great job of fleshing all of this out, really building this world, turning it into a world that I definitely want to see more stories for, even if Thrawn isn't involved. Like, I think this is a really interesting world that has a lot of politics and military stuff going on that needs to be wrapped up, that I want to see further, even past Thrawn. When Thrawn's in our part of the galaxy, like what is going on with the Grisks and the Chiss conflict. I really want to see more of that. But yeah, overall, I think it's a great trilogy. And if you're somebody like me who has at times been very bored by the Star Wars canon novels, but and not to say that they're not good. Like there's been very few that are bad. It's just they're all similar. They have similar tones. They have original trilogy humor. They have original trilogy style characters. It's a different version of Han Solo. It's a different version of Princess Leia. It's a different version of Luke. And yes, that's what started Star Wars, and it is the foundational piece of Star Wars, the fundamental piece of Star Wars, and it's the part that we all love going back to. But at times, when you have so much material over so many years, 40 years or 30 years of books, really, and we're getting into canon, and you're hoping they find a new outlet to tell Star Wars stories, the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy is your place to go. You don't need to have read the other Thrawn books. I would say it can enhance it because you'll know some of the characters already, like Aralani or Thrawn, but it's really its own thing. And even if you're not a Star Wars person, I mean, you probably aren't watching this video if you're not a Star Wars person, but if you're not a Star Wars person, you can read this as like a science fiction fantasy story, and it has its own politics, its own rules, its own terms for everything. It's completely new. And you don't really even realize you're in Star Wars until they say Thrawn like a million times. So I love this trilogy now. It's one I actually really want to reread now, having known what's going to happen at the end. Kind of look at it from a different lens, because Chaos Rising is a strong Thrawn book, and that came out last year. So that's why I know some people are going to say, well, that came out in 2020, so it's not part of this. But 2 of the 3 books came out this year. So Chaos Rising is still heavily about Thrawn. It's like Thrawn and Thalias both are the main characters for the most part. Then Greater Good is five, six, seven characters are like the main characters, and things are going on all over the place. Thrawn's only in probably 30-40% of the book. It's a lot bigger and more expansive. It's like, okay, he hooked you with Chaos Rising. He's going to go even further with Greater Good. At first, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I was reading for Thrawn. But then I saw what he does in Lesser Evil. I appreciated all the setup he does in Greater Good. It really tied together very, very well. Really enjoyed the end of this trilogy. So if you're someone who's struggling with maybe Greater Good and you're not sure if you should read Lesser Evil, you definitely should. And if you're somebody who hasn't gotten into this trilogy yet, because I know it isn't everybody's jam and not everybody has tried it, but I highly recommend it. And I think it's been great. And it's kind of one of those like underrated things. Everybody's talking about the High Republic this year. Everybody's talking about Bad Batch. This is one of those like underrated hidden things that like a lot of Star Wars book communities are talking about, but not really anybody else. And I would love it if more people got into this. So yes, number 3 is Thrawn Ascendancy Trilogy, or Lesser Evil if you want to be more specific and pick my favorite book from the trilogy. Yeah, what about your number 2? I think we have the same top 2. Just I don't know what order.
Well, yeah, I mean, number two goes to Light of the Jedi. Just what a way to kick off the year. That was, man, it made me optimistic about the High Republic. I was like, yeah, Jedi. And right now I'm like, oh man, you poor Jedi. Like, I feel so bad for so much that they're going through, just the affairs and state of the galaxy, how they're being stretched thin, and they're starting to feel like all the prequel Jedi's worst fears in a way, with their instability and all that. Especially a lot of the elder Jedi. Um, but Light of the Jedi is just wow. Like Avar Chris stand out, right? The music of the Force. Elzar Man is like the ocean, like just their interpretations of the Force. Just a lot of the stuff with like the Santeca's plotline still to this day intrigues me because we really haven't explored it other than like I want to say Out of the Shadows when we have Vernestra get the path um, to somewhere specific from um, the Santeca that's being kept by Martian Row. Um, but yeah, that intrigue there, just seeing I mean, essentially like a cold open of the Star Wars High Republic era of like, oh shit, our satellites are going down. Let's check in with the crew there. The crew is like, oh god, everything's going wrong. We're gonna die. And you see the Jedi as they're supposed to be. I think one of the bigger issues that I had growing up was like when you're a kid, you don't really get necessarily what he's like going for. George Lucas, the master himself, of like, yeah, these are Jedi at their end, sure, but they're also at their most flawed, held down by bureaucracy, fiddling amongst themselves, all these different elements essentially that weigh down the purpose of like listening to the force and doing what's right. And these Jedi simply are not like that. You have like so many characters introduced, so many, but like they all stand out. Loden Greatstorm with Belzetifar on Elforna. The whole plot of the kidnapping there is really great. The Nile are just wow. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm such a fan of them listening to like wreck punk or whatever they call it, but I do like the idea of like just drugged out, like insane villains just being held in this interesting power structure. Again, politics in this book was also very fascinating with how the Nile is structured, but all these people like pushed together, fighting against each other constantly, seeing who comes out on top, seeing that Martian just sets up everyone and to just take over full power, and just the attacks, the fact the great disaster was planned, right? Like, yeah, I mean, it's such a unique thing. It does leave me a lot of questions though, because I'm like, it does emphasize that hey, you know, a lot of this hyperspace stuff is new. I don't know if it's new or if it's like it's new because we lost so much in the dark ages. That's kind of what I'm hoping that's what they're going for. Because I feel like KOTOR still should be like 1,000 years before this. Um, and there are some elements that I don't want to say drag, but I do think that having so many characters at times is overwhelming. if it is all fun, because sometimes I just want to stick to a character a little bit more. Um, but otherwise, I mean, for Charles Soule's first big Star Wars book, smash hit. Like everything about the cover art too just gives you the sense of like, wow, like this is gonna be awesome. This is like you're gonna feel the light of the Jedi, and I did feel it throughout the book, and it's sad to say that so much of it has been gone on purpose because of story demands and where they're taking these Jedi at the end of Phase 3, and I can only imagine the Fallen Star is going to be devastating, however Claudia Gray writes it. But man, Charles Soule knocks it out of the park. So that's my number two. What about you?
Well, I'm glad we start to differ here because my number two is The Rising Storm. So I really had this was the toughest part of the list for me because I knew these were my top two. Originally, I thought maybe Bad Batch would be like number three, number two. I wasn't sure, but I knew these books were like neck and neck, and I was like, well, I can't put one of them as number one without putting the other one as number two because they're so good together, as well as just individually. They tell such different types of stories, but yet similar characters and similar types of great moments. So I did go with The Rising Storm at number two. I don't really have reasons why I like Light of the Jedi better, and I'm going to try to talk about mostly Rising Storm here because I'll talk about Light of the Jedi later. Uh, I just do, but like The Rising Storm is excellent, an excellent Star Wars book in its own right. Like it's it's action packed. It's got that darker edge to it that we expect from Star Wars sequels. It's got more expansive looks at the different types of Jedi. We get Ty York in this, who is a Jedi who has left the Order and is doing mercenary work and now brought back into the conflict. We get looks at that. We've got the whole Valo thing, which is crazy in the book, and it takes up a good, I would say, a good 40% of the book is Valo, and it's always tense. It's he does such a great job. Kevin Scott does a great job of pacing this book. It's really exciting. I would say, I guess maybe the end felt like it was like an after such a big conflict at Valo, I did feel like, okay, there's still more to this. I think that was it had the Return of the King effect a little bit with that, where it was like, okay, another ending. On top of that, that other ending was great with the leveler and all of that type of stuff. But yeah, the Rising Storm's got emotional stakes. We get to see the Jedi go from their peak to their lowest in a matter of months over this time period. It's got some incredible stuff. I love Markion Rose so much, and the way he's one of my new favorite Star Wars villains ever, and the way he's portrayed in this book. One of my favorite parts is the beginning with the like Indiana Jones type archaeology hunt where he's going with one of the members of his crew who is force sensitive trying to find the leveler, and it's got all these traps and all this stuff. That part like carried me through the beginning where you have a lot more of the dialogue with the Jedi. It's a lot more aftermath of Light of the Jedi, which is good, but like not as exciting as with stuff that was going on with him. And I kept was like, I want to get back to Markion Rose stuff. Like, what is going on with him? I want to see what he's doing there. And also the fact that I think I also listen to these with audiobooks as well as while I'm reading them, and it's just the stuff they do with the sound in those scenes was incredible. The music they play a lot of really dark side, ominous music. I mean, Mark Thompson's incredible and all this stuff. So yeah, The Rising Storm, I really like, I was searching for reasons why I wanted to say I like Light of the Jedi more or Rising Storm a little less. I think the ending thing was really the only thing that stood out to me at the time where it was like, okay, I would like a little bit more room to breathe with what happened with Valo before we jump into another conflict immediately. But we've had so much time since the books come out to reflect on both of those conflicts and like all the comics and stuff, and whether it's Edge of Balance, which we didn't even talk about, but or Tempest Runner, or all these things that really focus in on the aftermath of both of these massive conflicts in the Rising Storm that happened to the Jedi. Those do a good job of fleshing it out in the past, like after retroactively, but for me, I think I wanted a little bit more emotion there because we get that stark image of Stellan holding Lena So in the book, and then like at the end of that Valo chapter, and then after that we're like jump into the conflicts again. I think I wanted a little bit more of that. That's really my only criticism with the book. Other than that, I love that book. It's great. I mean, you should obviously, because both of our top twos are the two High Republic adult novels, you should read both of them. They're both fantastic. It's just kind of going to be up to your slight personal preference which one you like more. But yeah, I think we know what your number one is.
And my number one is actually Edge of Balance. No, no, it's clearly the Rising Storm. And yeah, I agree with a lot of your points. It it is definitely these two books are hard to choose between. But I think I agree with your like the critique that you have. It does feel like, especially like the secondary mission after Velo with Elzar, you know, yeah, they're using him like, and he is also volunteering to be used in like this darker, more like okay, like we'll make use of your emotions to kind of like lure out the enemy to get our way to the planet. I I think it does drag just the taddest bit there, but that dragging doesn't feel horrible to me because of just everything. I mean, look, this book belongs to both Elzar and Stellan. Stellan, I like his intrigue too. I really do like how a lot of his like promotional aspect of him of like being the poster boy for Jedi, like he's not against it, but he is like the one who's like on surveillance constantly, and when things go down, you are left with that striking image of him holding Lena Soph like dead and well presumed dead, and he's tattered and broken down. He's and I know people are like, Stellan's trained Vernestra. He's got to be this greater Jedi. Why is he like struggling so much? And even in Trail of Shadows, in the last comic just that we reviewed on Wednesday, like he has an outburst about it. He's like Velo, followed by what happened on with the Leveler. He's just like, no, that wasn't a hallucination. Like I think why this book in general, I mean, besides just Elzar just being a playboy, Anakin with more, what a better support system. I loved him there. I loved some of the Defense Force stuff. That was some interesting politics. Ty York was awesome here. Ram Jamorim, I loved his little segue chapter. Um, yeah, besides this probably being a much more interconnected story that I really think worked versus how Light of the Jedi and A Test Occurred aren't really connected per se. I think the bigger reason for why this was like my number one is I think I appreciated the reality of it. Like when something bad happens to you, right? Which let's just take the Great Disaster. That's something bad that happens to the galaxy, but you're like, okay, we're gonna come together. We're gonna do what's right. We're gonna make do, even if it is so horrible and debilitating. You will handle it. But in reality, when another thing just as bad happens, right? The whole Republic Fair being a chaotic, like 10 chapters of it, right? When the second thing happens, that's when like a person breaks down, all right? And that's when like a person, as much as you've built up walls for one thing, those walls are not strong enough or big enough to defend from this equally chaotic and painful thing that happens. And then, yeah, sure, they rush into the leveler stuff, but that is also kind of being set up at the beginning of the book. So you can criticize that, but I felt that it felt very appropriate that these characters who have known peace for so long and who handled themselves admirably the first time and provided the light, they ran themselves a little too thin. Even if it wasn't entirely their fault, they were a little too optimistic, a little too settled with how things were and not realizing that like there had to be more done, and that creates these conflicts where now Avar goes from singing the sound and the music of the Force to now being like she doesn't really have good terms with Stellan, and she's almost like a warmongering Jedi, and then Stellan is just traumatized, and then Elzar is just you know pursuing the Force, haunted by visions of like things that worse to come, right? And all the Padawans are having their ups and downs, but it's really because of the rising storm, because so much of it is so debilitating after that first chance of like proving to themselves and to the galaxy that the Jedi are here for everyone, that the High Republic is expanding to the Outer Rim, and everything's going to be great. This is the first time where they're like, I'm not ready for this. I don't know how to do this, and obviously the leveler takes it to another level for all of them, pun intended, I guess. But now they're like, all their worst fears after something so traumatic has just happened. That breaks all these characters who are experienced a leveler. So Yeah, I genuinely, I think it is one of my favorite ever novels. I plan on rereading it at some point, maybe after the end of phase one of the High Republic, just the big books at least, and like segments of the other ones. But yeah, I thought it was just a very good choice by Kevin Scott to not only just make this like a tough incident, but to make this like the one that like actually breaks these characters down and results in these stories that we've been getting in the comics and books that they just can't handle it. Like they're trying, they need hugs, they need support, they need anything, and they're not getting it because they're dependent on fixing things for the galaxy. And I think it's building its way slowly but surely into the prequel Jedi's bureaucracy and hesitancy, and maybe we're still a long way from it. Maybe this is just where it happens. I don't know, but either way, just to understand that people are fragile, right? It doesn't matter how superpowered you are. It's always the second one that hits harder than the first. I appreciated that. So that's why it's my number one.
Yeah, I completely respect that opinion. Like totally. Like I don't disagree with anything you said. I just and like I said earlier, I can't pinpoint what it is about Light of the Jedi, but it was the first book we reviewed for this channel as well. I think it's one of the first Star Wars books that I really was like, all right, I gotta like look at this with a critical eye because we're talking about this on a show. Um, yeah, it just gripped me immediately with the whole great disaster, all different points of view there, the way that connects so beautifully between everybody. Then we also our looks at the Jedi as these like these angelic figures coming down to save people. We've got and the different facets of them. You got Loden and Bell coming down and they're dealing with stuff on the ground. And then you got Avar in the sky who's doing her form of like battle meditation, connecting everybody. And you've got the people who are flying the fighters in the sky. It was just such an exciting opening. And then after that, diving into further politics and stuff like that and seeing how the politics of the High Republic work, as well as the Santeca stuff was cool because I like any tie-ins to the rest of the canon that you get. I like that that was set forward and that those ideas were brought in. I really enjoyed all the stuff at the end too, the different conflicts that were going on at the end, whether it's Bell and Loden or whether it's Avar, like all of that stuff, Avar and Elzar's investigation that was going on. The book just gripped me the entire time. I thought it was just excellent world building as well on top of good Star Wars storytelling because it did like start a new world. I felt like I was learning new rules and new things about Star Wars that I never did before, and that was kind of the whole thing I was excited about with the High Republic was finally getting some new stuff in Star Wars canon books, like finally starting to learn stuff instead of just repeating fun stories. This was like a real thing that we were pushing and getting to see come to life and be actually an important part of Star Wars. And I think just probably because it's the first one of those books that came out is the main reason it stuck with me because I was just really surprised with how much I liked it, as well as how much I was enjoying it, even looking at it from a critical perspective, how much I enjoyed it as a piece of Star Wars, how much I enjoyed it as just a piece of sci-fi fantasy. All of that was great. And I'm not even talking yet about my favorite part, which is Mark Sean Rowe, his introduction, the introduction to the Nile. Initially, when I heard about the Nile, I was not that excited about them. I thought their designs looked cool. Everything seemed cool, but it seemed like, okay, we're coming up with like a sci-fi type villain that's just going to be kind of a desperate way to get away from things we've seen in Star Wars. Like, what's going to be unique about this? And I think the politics of the Nile is the thing that really got me. And the way the system's set up, they did a great job on like really defining what this looks like, who the leaders are, the Tempest runners, what the storms are, like way it all interconnects, the way that each person between the Tempest runners or the different storms or the different strikes, the way they interact with each other, how they're really a group that's all about money and plunder and they don't care about each other, but they use the group as a facet to get the stuff they want, to live the free life that they want with no consequences, nothing. They just destroy and ravage and they take and I thought all that was really fascinating take on like space pirates, as well as a fascinating look at what you can do with Star Wars villains. And then on top of that, you've got the classical Shakespearean, dark, brooding Markion Rowe, who's like in charge of all of it, slowly weaving his web of plans as he's getting towards, destroying all his enemies, both inside the Nile and outside. His manipulation of people like Kassav in the story, or the way he manipulates even the Jedi throughout both books. He's now, like I said earlier, one of my favorite Star Wars villains ever. I think I really cannot wait to see what they do with him in the Fallen Star. I'm sure Claudia Gray will be excellent with that, and then we get to see more with the Eye of the Nile story and all of that. Yeah, I think it's just really fascinating. I really loved all of the things we were learning as we are going along with this book that set the stage for the future. So yeah, I can see where some people could say this book feels like it's a little slow at times, or it feels like it's too much exposition for an entire world, because it was at the time. But I think for me, as someone who was just wanting something new in Star Wars, wanting something that wasn't the same old with the books, and hoping for important storytelling within the books and comics itself that hasn't been there really since like 2015, 2016. This was a huge breath of fresh air, and something that I was way better than I was expecting. I think for the Rising Storm, I had a level of expectation now, and it needed to meet it. With the Light of the Jedi, I had no idea what to expect, and exceeded all those expectations like tenfold. So for me, Light of the Jedi has kind of like stuck with me the most throughout 2021, and I think really defines 2021 for Star Wars. And yeah, that's it. That's our list. So I guess to run over them one more time, my number 5 was Visions. Sanak's number 5 was Visions. We both had number 4 was Bad Batch. Then number 3 I had the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, and Sanak had Into the Dark. And then for 2 and 1 we had alternated. I did Rising Storm, he did Light of the Jedi, and then I did Light of the Jedi as my 1, and he did Rising Storm as 2. So those were our lists, and that was 2020 in Star Wars. So thank you all so much for following along with us throughout the year. We kind of we started at the end of last year of the podcast, and YouTube became our main platform in about March, April, May ish, when the Bad Batch was about to get started. So it's been a fun year with all of you. Thanks for sticking with us, those who have been through the entire time, and if you're just joining, we appreciate you all joining and being a part of all this for the 2021 year. So it was an exciting year, and we're looking forward to 2022, and we hope you guys are too, because it's going to be a crazy year for Star Wars, and we're going to run all of that down on Friday. So you want to stick with Star Wars Lads for that. We'll be doing an entire 2022 Star Wars preview. So everything that's coming out that we know of right now in comics, books, video games, TV. I don't think there's any films, but we'll be talking about all of that for 2022 on Friday. So you're going to want to stick around for that. If you haven't checked out last week's videos, we did post comic reviews last Wednesday, as well as last Monday. I did a Star Wars Lads holiday special with my buddy Kylo Ren. It's a fun little sketch. If you're still in the holiday mood from last weekend, you're going to want to check that out. All those things are on the channel. And then stick around this week for Wednesday's comic reviews as well, and then the 2022 preview on Friday. If you haven't yet, like the video down below, subscribe to the channel for Star Wars content 3 days a week. We post videos Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then comment below. Let us know your top 5 or top 10 or whatever, all your favorite Star Wars things from this year, what your favorite 2021 Star Wars things are. We want to hear you guys, and we always respond to all the comments, so let us know down below. And then you can follow us on social media at Star Wars Lads on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So thanks again for following us throughout 2021. We'll be back on Friday for that wrap up of 2021, officially looking into 2022. And we hope to continue making good Star Wars content for you all into next year. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.